What's up, ladies and gents, and welcome back to the Love All Life podcast hosted by yours truly, Gaston Murray. And today we're going to be talking to you about the illusion of winning and losing. Winning is fun. Losing, not so fun. And if I had to look back on my junior career and collegiate career, I'd say that I took way too much stock on when I won and when I lost. And I put my identity in both of those way too much. My dad can even tell you himself, who was my coach growing up, that when it was time to practice and when it was time to compete, and if I lost, I was that kid that cried on the court. I was that kid that was falling on the ground, that was being dramatic, and feeling like life on the court was not fair because things are just not going my way. Well, I'm here to tell you, ladies and gentlemen, that tennis does not reward victims. And so you're going to have to come to the obvious conclusion that losing is a part of this journey. You are going to lose. It's just a simple matter of fact of life on the court and life off the court as well. So I want to take you guys back to memory lane. I talked about this in the first episode of my podcast, and how during the time when I was around 8 years old, right, I'm playing my first tournament. I ended up winning it. Now, the very next tournament, I kid you not, right, my dad is driving me down near Miami, Hollandale, and this was a tournament that was a little bit better than the previous tournament that I played, which was a rookie tournament. I go into that tournament playing a seeded player. I kid you not, I got cooked. Probably around 0-1, 0-0. And I left that match feeling like a failure. And the reality of the result was, yeah, I failed. And I had to come to the conclusion that there were certain players that were just better than me, and I had to get better. So I really want to dive into the fact of this matter because this is very prevalent, especially when it comes to junior tennis or if you're at the recreational level. This also happens at the pro level as well. When you lose, and when you lose badly, you have to accept that loss for what it is, right? Losing is circumstantial. Winning is circumstantial. Now, I want to talk about the first part. And the first part that I want to talk about is winning, right? What does winning actually mean, right? Because when you think about winning is circumstantial. But here's the thing that people don't catch, right? There is an illusion to winning. And I came across this clip, and I'm sure you guys who follow the sport a lot, especially on socials like Instagram or YouTube, I saw this clip of Andre Agassi. He was in this interview. He was talking about winning and losing. And he said that winning and losing was an illusion. And I'm thinking to myself, when I first heard this, I'm like, wait, what? Winning and losing, it's an illusion. I was taken back by it, baffled. But then I thought for a minute, okay, this is one of the greatest players of all time. He's saying this for a reason. And it finally hit me. And the reality is that winning and losing, right, is just a byproduct of how we prepare. And it's really just something that comes off of something very circumstantial that we all have to face, right? Winning and losing is an illusion. And he was breaking down this simple fact that I had to come in terms with, even as a coach and a former player who's had a good amount of experience in the sport, right? But to hear this quote, especially from one of the greatest players of all time, right? It still hit me. But then looking back on it, I was pondering on it and said, okay, you know what, this makes sense, right? Because you have to start enjoying the journey of what it means to properly win and properly lose. But I'm going to go back to the subject of winning, right? Because people are often confused about the circumstantial results of winning, and most people are not willing to accept the fact that winning the right way has a cost. And here's the problem that I see with tennis players that are playing at any level, right? They think just because they win that is the definition or the end all be all of who they are. And they believe that just because they've won a match that they've gotten better. And it's simply not true, right? Winning does not mean that you're automatically getting better. So if you're going out in a match, let's say, for example, and you're a higher seed and you go into that match thinking, okay, I don't want to lose. I don't want to be embarrassed, right? I want to impress my friends, my coaches, my parents. You're probably saying to yourself, you know what? Okay, I know I have to do the right thing, but I can get away with doing things that are not going to make me better and still win. And there are a lot of players in that same situation, and they're living in this cycle of insanity of thinking that they can do the same thing at the same level and graduate to other levels and win. And it's just simply not true. So my best advice to you when it comes to winning is you have to pay the cost of what it means to win the right way. If you are trying to win the wrong way, you will not get better. Okay? So take my advice, pay the cost of winning the right way. Stop worrying about results. Stop worrying about UTR. Stop worrying about rankings. Stop worrying about all these things that you can't control. Right? Remember, to gain control of this sport, you have to lose control, right? It's a simple matter of fact. Okay? Second point, playing scared, fearing losing, things of that nature, you got to get it out of your system, right? So if you're listening to this, it doesn't matter what level you are, right? If you want to win the right way, you got to pay the cost of being brave. You got to pay the cost of having courage and doing the things that most people don't want to do. That's what it really comes down to when it comes to becoming a champion in this sport, right? When you win, obviously, yeah, it feels great. But if you're winning the wrong way, how could you say that you're actually getting better? So just take that into consideration and understand the simple fact that if you think that you can get away with just winning anyway, the chances are you're not going to get better. Now, let's go to losing. Obviously, losing hurts. I hate losing. Playing junior tennis in the state of Florida, obviously, you had kids hooking people left and right. I had parents talking to me, trying to intimidate me just because they didn't like the fact that I was beating their kid. You have all these types of circumstantial events happening, especially in the sport of tennis. And I'd say, looking back at that journey, my dad would tell you this, right? He did not expect a lot of the vitriol and the adversity that came with this sport. I didn't either. But because I enjoyed the game so much, because I enjoyed being creative on my own, and I enjoyed the fact that if I could solve the problem of overcoming my fear in this area or overcoming maybe a certain obstacle and beating that player, I felt like I was on top of the world. And that's what really drew me into the sport. However, I had to come to the reality of I was going to lose. It didn't matter how good I was. It didn't matter how talented I was. It didn't matter how much I wanted to win, right? And we all get in this phase of thinking that we have to have things going away. We simply don't need to, right? That's not what tennis is about, right? You got to understand that in tennis, you cannot control everything. So with losing, right, you could lose the wrong way, but you could also lose the right way. And people often miss the part of trying to lose the right way because they lose, or let's say they lose in an instance where they think they got embarrassed. Obviously, there's frustration. And again, I am not saying that you should not take losses into consideration, but a loss is a loss at the end of the day. That's what it is, right? Just like a win is a win, a loss is a loss. But you can't define yourself that way. And so with the loss, you have to say to yourself, okay, if I'm losing, I'm going to lose the right way. I got to lose playing with bravery. I got to lose playing with courage. And if I miss certain shots, I miss. If I don't get to the goal that I want, it's okay, right? You don't have to get frustrated just because you lose a point or you lose a match, you lose that break point, right? Because you can't take any of that back. And the beauty of tennis that provides especially for individuals who are playing the sport, is that there is no time in tennis, right? So you have the ability to come back. You have the ability to impose your will on your opponent, but you can't do that if you're always playing frustrated. You can't do that if you're worried about losing. You can't do that if you're worried about the coaches or you're worried about the recruits that are competing against you. You can't do that if you're constantly worried and you're constantly have all this anxiety about what will happen if you lose. Again, losing is a part of the sport and you're just going to have to deal with it. You cannot be a victim of your circumstance all the time. And the trick that is being played on many players today is that they're being victims of not only winning and losing because they have falsely placed their identity in that. And they're probably not the only ones at fault, right? There's parents putting way too much pressure on kids. There's other coaches putting unrealistic expectations on players when they're not focused on development. And coaches do it with adults, right? Some coaches may do it with pros. But you see even the best pros under pressure. People like Novak Djokovic, Rafael Nadal, Roger Federer, right? I just named the best players, if not some of the best players, obviously, who are not playing anymore, but in their time on the planet, right? When push comes to shove under pressure, they knew what it took, right? To be calm, to be cool, to be collected, and understand the fact that if they lost, they were going to lose playing the right way. So that is my take, right, for the illusion of winning and losing, right? So take this into consideration. Winning is important to a degree, especially if you do have goals. And you do have to take losing into account as well if there are certain things that you're aiming for, right? So in no way am I saying that winning and losing, it doesn't matter. And you should never take any losses or any wins into account. I do believe in breakthroughs. I do believe in bad losses. But what I don't believe is putting all your identity in winning a match or losing a match. And if you're doing that, then chances are you're not getting better at the sport and you're not developing the right way as a player. Now, going back to the weight of winning and losing, let's say you are in line, or let's say you have the potential to become a Division I prospect, right? There are a certain amount of, let's say, wins or events or things that you have to accomplish in order to show coaches that you can compete at that level, if you guys follow me. So with that, you do have to take some winning into account and who you compete against. That way you have an accurate measuring stick if you can play at a certain level. It would be the same if someone were to go pro. Let's say, for example, you're on a track where you're beating most of the competition in USTA and you're winning a bunch of titles and you might have the chance to go pro. Well, you're going to have to measure that based upon how much winning you're doing at the, say, future or challenger level. And then from that, you will probably decide if it's a really good idea to go pro or go to college, right? So those are just examples of, let's say, if you're taking winning and losing into account, it is important because, again, you need an accurate measure stick of where you're trying to go if you have high goals. And the same goes for losing. If you're losing to certain competition and let's say you're trying to jump the gun and you're playing above your level and you're not winning any matches, chances are you need to come down and look at the losses and look at the tournaments that you're playing and say to yourself, okay, I have to reevaluate the tournaments or the schedule I'm playing and play to a level where I know I can try to dominate at and dominate that level so much to the point where I have no choice but to move up eventually because I'm developing myself into a better competitor. And I think the biggest trick that I see young players do is jump the gun and try to play competition and try to prove that they can win at a level when they know they're not capable of doing so. So with those two things, just take that into consideration. Understand the fact that, hey, winning and losing matters to an effect, but you cannot place your identity in it. So I hope you guys have enjoyed this podcast. And if you're listening and watching this on YouTube, please subscribe and like to the Love All Life podcast. Thank you guys for listening. And I will be notifying you guys on any future events. And I will also be notifying you guys on anything that pertains to this podcast and what I will be doing in terms of sharing. Again, you can find my page on Instagram, on YouTube. You can also follow my other account, Tennis with G-Man, on Instagram and on YouTube as well. Love you guys. Stay blessed. And I hope you stay tuned to the next Love All Life podcast. G-Man is out.